Hey, you, Nina here. You are officially listening to Triggered Can We Play With That wherever you get your podcasts. And today, y'all, we're going to be diving into it because we're going to be talking about supremacist parts. I'm going to give you a 1 to 5 spectrum. We are going to be playing with it. If you are already feeling like, pause, take a breath on in. You've got this. We're going to really be playing with it. I'm going to give you a real story, something that recently in my life occurred with me. And I'm going to share with you and sort of pick it apart and really right, give you that transforming a hard conversation into many teachable moments. So if you're not following me on Instagram at Drama Therapist Nina, now's a good time to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube, yay. If you're not, you might want to. Yeah, you get to see how expressive I am. Otherwise, here's what we're working on. We are, of course, going to be exploring oppression today, in particular, oppressive parts, and how I'm going to refer to them as supremacist parts. So we're not going to be thinking in a power dynamic as in like somebody's supremacist and somebody's not supremacist. That is not how it works. The world would be so much simpler if it was, but it's just not how it works. So I'm going to help you diversify, yes, what the idea of a supremacist part or character within a person, what that might look like. I'm going to repeat that back to you. What does a supremacist part or character in a human being even look like? That's what we're going to be exploring. So get a journal or a good friend to dialogue with what comes up for you in this episode, because we are going to start some conversations. I can guarantee it. Yes, yes. Of course, we're not going to talk about everything around supremacy and supremacist parts, but we are going to talk about at least one facet. So get your journal, get your friend, and otherwise, I want to know. Are you ready to play?
Welcome to Triggered. Can we play with that? You know that moment when your emotions ramp up in an instant, leaving you feeling helpless, frozen, or out of control? In that moment, you've been emotionally hijacked, the very definition of triggered. And I want to ask you, can we play with that? I'm Nina L. Garcia, drama therapist and empowerment coach of Houston Creative Arts Therapy. Join me as we discover ways to empower you and the people who mean the most to you to transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Triggered. Real playful. Real respectful. Real empowered.
Let's take a breath. Ooh, I got a story for you, folks. So, walk with me here. Imagine I'm going to take you through a journey, but it is, of course, important when I'm telling a true story, and this is a true story, that what I'm doing is, of course, giving you my perspective, which means you are missing multiple perspectives. Anytime anybody tells you one version, right, you're missing perspective on it. So, I'm going to tell you my perspective on this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a conversation with another person in the story. And I'm going to ask you to look at this person as if they are a character, as if I've pulled them out of that moment in time and I've said, this is a character that we're talking about now. Because, of course, one moment cannot define an entire human being. It just can't, right? And thank goodness for that in many instances. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to invite you to look at this as a character, just a moment that we're looking at. And the character's name is Evelyn. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and talk about me and Evelyn. Are you ready? Let's take another breath because we're about to talk about supremacist parts. Yes, we're about to talk about supremacist parts. And here we go. So I'm having this conversation on the phone with Evelyn. Now, Evelyn's the leader of an organization, and several members of Evelyn's organization happen to come to me and say, hey, I've had this problem with such and such in the organization. And it was over and over again the same person. And so I said, well, we got to go to Evelyn. We got to figure out, we need a solution for this, right? We need somebody to be able to field the conflict that is happening here. If many members in the organization are having problem with one member, let's figure out how we can find a solution. And so I get on the phone with Evelyn. It's supposed to be a 15-minute conversation. And I say, as I'd messaged and I say at the top, I said, we just need to have something in place so that your members feel like they can come to a sort of solution around when there is conflict with somebody who has a position of power in the organization, right? That needs to be in place. And the conversation that ensued was surprising. I'm going to tell you some things that happened, and I'm going to share with you why I was surprised. We're going to look at it through as much of a non judgmental lens as we can, because the reality is the reason why we can talk about supremacist parts of people, right? Supremacist characters, is because there are lots of supremacist narratives that exist in the world. And guess what, folks? We're mostly all raised with them, right? To some degree, we're all raised with them, right? And just in case you're like, supremacist parts, what is that, Nina? Allow me to elaborate before I share more on what Evelyn and I talked about. Supremacist parts are the parts of people that have a very particular idea about how the world and people in the world should exist. So particular, in fact, that they are willing to box in other people, to tell other people how they should live their lives, to make laws that restrict and limit people in living in their fullest existence, right? And we're not talking about doing harm or not harm, right? We're not talking about like saying like murderers can go free, right? We're talking about people who have supremacist ideas around race, that some races are better than other races, right? That some ethnicities are better than other ethnicities, that some genders ideas, right, are better than other gender ideas, and so on and so forth. So that's what supremacist parts do. They're really particular about, I think the world should be this way, and I think everyone else should live in it this way too. So let's move forward. I'm talking on the phone with Evelyn, and I'm saying, we got a lot of members. We just need to have a solution. And it is already striking me as odd that, Evelyn says, well, we don't have, I said, I know we don't have that. I know we don't have that. That's why we got to look at this, right? Because we got a lot of members coming to you about this. And so the first thing that I noticed that sort of flagged me as I'm looking for supremacist parts and what I'm noticing and what I will teach you after I share this story, one of the things that I notice is that she gets defensive. And I notice that it's defense because how I perceive it is she begins to tell her own story about how she's engaged with this person and how other people should be able to handle it like her. Like they just need to stand up to him. That was one of the quotes, right? They just need to stand up to him. And immediately I'm flagged over there and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. We want other people to behave how you would behave, but other people aren't you, right? And so we've got this. I'm going to get defensive and I'm going to tell you a personal story about how people should engage in this way, right? Now, this is like a level 2 supremacist, right? With 5 is the most that you can be. And I promise I will declare more to you in a bit, right? This is like a level 2 in the spectrum. It's low, but it's there, right? This is that unconscious supremacist level. So the conversation goes on, I'm like, but those people aren't you, right? We have to think about you hold a position of the greatest power in this organization, so much so that people don't feel like they can come to you because they think that you might protect him over them. So we just need to come up with a solution for everyone, right? I come back to that, right? I'm empowered. I'm like, we need to come up with a solution for everyone so that I'm not dealing with it. You're not dealing with it. We just have a protocol in place to help support people through this. But then she goes on, and I think again, I'm like, why aren't we talking about a solution? Like, why aren't we just agreeing there needs to be a solution here to keep everyone safe, right? The people in power as well as the members. And the next line really floors me because what it says is she's avoiding holding herself and others accountable. And the line was this: we go on, and I say, well, according to the member XYZ, he is doing this. I've had issues. You've had issues, bippity boppity boo. And what ends up happening is, as I'm saying these things, the leader of the organization, Evelyn, she says, well, Nina, he's just not going to be woke. Okay. And he's not going to be here, in his position much longer. And I was floored. I literally, it was my face. I was like, what did you just say? He's not going to be woke. First off, why are you dropping this line on me right now? So he's not going to be woke. You don't need to be woke to treat people with respect. There's a thought, right? And for everyone listening, you do not need to be a woke person to treat people with respect. So There's the one bit, and then he's not even going to be here much longer. And so here we have, I'm avoiding holding him accountable at this point, even though I know multiple members of my organization have had an issue with this person. Nina, I'm avoiding holding him accountable right now because it makes me uncomfortable. He's not going to be on the board much longer. And, I don't think we can change him. Right. And so when you're coming from a powered mindset, which is very much the supremacist move, you're looking for someone to be right and someone to be wrong, right? And in this case, we have, I can't say that he's wrong because then that would mean that, they would have to be right. And if he's wrong, then I have to get rid of him. And then who am I going to depend on, to hold up that position that, that he's holding up? And if that weren't the case, right? And if he were right, well, if he were right, then that would mean that I wouldn't have to deal with this at all. And so, you know what? We're just going to avoid it altogether. We're just going to avoid it. He's not even going to be here. It's not going to be an issue. But what we do in avoiding holding someone accountable who's been accused of harm, right? Multiple instances in this case. What we do when we avoid holding someone accountable is we harm the people who've already said there's been harm. We see how that makes sense? Right now, I know for some of you, you're like, duh, Nina, right? For some of you, this might be news. If you avoid holding someone accountable, that's like putting the blanket on it and saying, oh, it doesn't exist. Boo, it still exists under that blanket, right? This is like trauma. You put a blanket over trauma. I don't care how many years you put over that trauma. If it's not processed, it still exists under the years of that blanket, right? It's still there. So that was the second thing, right? The second flag that I was like, oh my gosh, we're clearly, right? We're avoiding holding someone accountable. If you were to look at this from an empowered mindset, we would not avoid holding someone accountable. We'd say, wow, it seems odd that so many people have a complaint about this individual. Why don't we just look into it? We don't need to say that someone's right or someone's wrong. We just need to say, wow, there's clearly some conflict. Let's find a solution, right? Nobody has to be kicked out of their position. Members don't have to leave the organization. But what we do have to do is agree there is a conflict and let's find the bridge. If we don't find the bridge, what's going to happen? It's predictable. Okay. So, two flags already we've got for a supremacist part that is present, right? We've got, I'm going to get defensive about this and tell you a personal story about how people should engage in the world the way I do. And we've got, I'm going to avoid this issue, actually, and I'm not going to hold people accountable in order to move forward with this, right? So it's two things already. The third thing, as we kept going in this conversation, I said, well, I'm hearing lots of other things. I'm a little confused about why we're talking about those things because we work in an organization that helps heal people. Just saying, helps heal people. So I'm really just saying we don't need to talk about this anymore. Right? I said this, we don't need to talk about this anymore. We just need to have something in place. That's all I'm saying. And again, third line, flagging the bell here. What I heard from Evelyn was, well, Nina, some people are just so impatient. And I was just done. I was so done with this conversation. We've got people in an organization. I'm going to recap this for you folks. We've got people in an organization who said, right, paying members who say that they've been harmed and they'd like a solution. They say that they've been harmed by a person in power, right? Person in power in the organization. And I go to the president, and this is what the president says. Where is the safety in the organization? Where is the safety? If members come to me, right, and to these people in power and say, I've been harmed, and what they get back is, you're being impatient. You should handle it like I handle it. And we're not going to deal with this right now because they're not going to be here much longer to hurt you anyway. This is the definition of what it is to be complicit. When people talk about being complicit, this is what it looks like. It's not only what it looks like, but it is a part of what it looks like. And so I was very done with this conversation. We hung up not long after that. conversation could have kept going. Evelyn asked to speak with me again. We have not spoken again. Uh, and I don't know what we would speak about, because if I come saying we have people who need a solution and you keep pushing me back, saying, no, we don't, no, we don't. I don't really know what to do with that, because it sounds to me like maybe Evelyn doesn't want a solution or doesn't know how to find a solution. Or here's the reality, because we're human, may not have the capacity to find a solution. But what that means in the case of this story, right, is that if Evelyn is the head of an organization, lots of power in that alone, and also has other intersections of identity, like the fact that she is a white woman. And then we have the members in the organization, primarily of whom have concern over this other member in power, and they're members of racial and ethnic minority groups. This dynamic is as old as time. This is not surprising. This is not new, right? For those of you who are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is still happening. This is not surprising. This is not new. If it is, come talk to me. Powered dynamics exist. And we all, for the most part, at some point in our life, have likely entertained a supremacist part. It's just a part of the packaging of being a human. We grow up in oppressive systems. We get taught oppressive dynamics about one thing or the other. Sometimes the identities are outside of us, right? So it's easier to oppress, quote unquote. Sometimes there are identities that are also within us, and we develop internal oppressor parts, right? So within this story alone, right? If I just pause it here, right? And I say psychoeducation parts. Now, I've told you a little bit about, right, what supremacist parts are. I've told you a little bit about there's a spectrum of supremacy. And I think that's really, really important, because if I had to invite you to take a moment like this, if you've had a moment, if you're the Evelyn in this story, right? If I were Evelyn in this story, I would take note of, in that moment, there may have been some supremacist parts. Now, Evelyn, the real Evelyn, if she were to listen to this episode, may completely disagree with me. And that's okay, right? We would have a conversation about it, hopefully, and try to build a bridge. But from where I'm standing through my lenses, right, these are the things that I'm seeing. And I'm wondering, how do we build a bridge? So again, I invited you to flip the script and play with this, right? So here is what I'm thinking. I want to be able to invite you to imagine that, again, it's not that people are supremacist or aren't supremacist, but that we have supremacist parts. Sometimes they're really big, sometimes they're very small, right? Sometimes we have multiple supremacist parts for multiple identities, right? Sometimes we really just sort of hone in on one identity. Whatever the case is, right? Whatever the case is, I want to offer you the anti-supremacist or the supremacist spectrum, okay? I want to give you 5 different points for how you can be able to say, you might have a supremacist part if you meet one of these 5 criteria, yeah? So get out your pen, your notebook. This is a great time to say, wait, let me pause this episode because I am going to take some notes, right? Okay. 1 through 5, here we go. 5 is the most supremacist you could be. 1 is the least supremacist you could be, okay? So we're going to go from 5, which is like overt supremacist, to 1, which is anti-supremacist, okay? Now, again, these are parts that are cultivated. Either your family cultivated them, your friends can help cultivate them, the media can help cultivate them, I can help cultivate them, you can help cultivate them, right? I feel like I'm selling you it on here, but I sort of am, right? I really want you to develop an anti-supremacist part. I can blatantly say I've got a bias for it, folks. And here we go. Okay, so 5 is your overt supremacist. Again, this is your like obvious, they think that they're a supremacist, they think that they're better than some type of identity out there, whether it's race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, whatever the case is. They believe that their beliefs and ideas are worth more than somebody else, okay? That's your level 5. They're going to say it, they're going to breathe it, they're going to teach it. That's a level 5, okay? Overt. Hopefully that makes sense. Then we go down to a level 4, okay? Now, your level 4 is your casual supremacist. Casual supremacists really like to joke about things. Okay. Casual supremacists like to joke about things. So they're the people who are like, oh, can't you take a joke? Right. That's your level 4 supremacist. Those jokes specifically are at the expense of other identities and individuals that, right, that they don't have those identities. That is your level 4 supremacist. Okay. They're casual. They say it right there in front of your face, but it's under this blanket of comedy. Okay. Except it's not funny. So we'll move on to 3. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. 3 is your covert supremacist. When we talk about covert supremacy, these are the parts in people that know, probably, usually, that they shouldn't say anything, but they're thinking it and self feeling it. Yes, we've got like what's called, oh my goodness, cognitive prejudice versus affective prejudice versus conative prejudice. Oh my goodness, right? And this is like when you have prejudice in your thoughts and your feelings and your behaviors. Those are 3 different types of prejudice. Oh my gosh, just dropping knowledge on you. Okay. So your covert supremacist is the one who they usually know they shouldn't say anything, but they're giving you the eye. They're like, oh, this guy can believe that. People like this. Okay. They don't say it the way that a level 4 or 5 will, but they're going to allude to it. So you say, what do you mean people like that? You know what I mean, right? If you push them, they usually back off and they say, never mind, sorry, never mind, right? They back off usually. Okay. That's your covert supremacist. Okay. If they find that you're in on it, what they're pushing are stereotypes. Okay. That's usually a level 3. It's a lot of stereotypes, what they've been taught to believe. And they may need some invitations to lean in on out of that. Okay. That's your level 3. Let's go to 2. 2 is probably the most common that you meet out and about, especially if you're in this work, anti-oppression work. Your level 2 supremacist is your unconscious supremacist, right? That's your unintentional supremacist. They like mean the best. They really want to show up, right? Evelyn, classic level 2. When we get to some of the things, maybe a little, right? Like classic level 2. I really want to do well. It's unintentional, but they get defensive about things. They try to put their own story in as what everybody else should do, right? They again, I think being defensive is probably the biggest thing that we see for level 2s. Is I didn't mean that, right? And they miss that intent is different than impact, and then they don't know how to hold themselves or others accountable. These are most often traits ascribed to what I would say is like a level 2 supremacist, right? That unintentional supremacy. They get defensive and they avoid accountability in some way, shape, or form. Then you got your level 1s. Your level 1 is your anti-supremacist, okay? Anti-supremacist parts, right? Characters, when we develop them in ourselves, are intentionally saying, I am going to challenge prejudicial thoughts, right? Thoughts that box people in, thoughts that limit people's existence. I'm going to challenge that in myself. I'm challenging my thoughts, my feelings, and behaviors, right? Intentionally. That's my intention. And so I accept, because I live in oppressive systems, because I don't live in a bubble, I'm going to accept that when I step in it, and I will step in it, okay, that one day when I offend someone, right, and it wasn't going to be my intent, but when my impact is that, right, such as that I am going to not defend myself. I'm just going to own my truth. I'm going to say, you know what, that wasn't my intent. And then I'm going to hold myself accountable for the impact, and I'm going to try to build a bridge. So, you know what, we do need a solution for that. Let me go ahead and let's talk about it, right? Let's find that. Let's figure out what that is. Not going to get defensive, right? I'm going to own the truth of what's happening, and I'm going to see how we can move forward. Okay. That's your level 1s. Are you guys still with me? I hope you are. I love talking about this stuff. And I think one of the things that I'll hear back now that you also have the 1 to 5, right? Supremacy spectrum, is how much easier it is for people once they have an idea of the difference in characters, right? What kind of spread we're talking about here. Again, it's such a powered, right, binary way of thinking. If we're going to say that we have just supremacists and not supremacists, that's not how it works. That's not how people work. But, but using this 5-part spectrum, right, you get a much wider variety of where people fit into categories. And the reality is, many of us are between categories, right? Or we're, for some identities, we're in one category, but for other identities, we may be in another category, right? Our supremacist part may be in a different category, right? My hope is that we're all trying to develop an anti-supremacist part, especially if you're listening to this episode, right? And that when someone does step in it, that you recognize, well, snap, crackle, pop, you know what? Why is this person struggling with the level 5 supremacist attitude? Seriously, I want you to ask yourself that right now, actually. Ask yourself that question. Why would someone struggle with a level 5 supremacist character? Were they born that way? Did the universe write that on them before they came into the world? Or, shocker thought here, is it something they were taught? Is it something they were conditioned to have, to believe, to think, to feel, to breathe, right? To do? It's a freaking story that was passed down and passed down and passed down so often, right? And we're not even going to talk about who it's benefited and who it hasn't. Think about right now. Why is that the case? Because it's what they were taught. Level 5 supremacy doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good. There's so much. You know what, y'all? I was about to get into it, but that's not what this episode is about. If you really want to talk about anti-supremacy and supremacist parts with me, you come and talk to me, right? Hit me up. We got masterclasses starting in August through the rest of this year. We're going to be talking about these little empowerment bits. But I know we're nearing the end of the episode. I want to know, what are your takeaways? And I did tell you, for those of you who enjoy a bit of self exploration, of course, I'm going to leave you with some goodness for the upcoming week. But I did tell you I was going to give you, how do you recognize, right? Like, how do you really recognize what are the supremacist parts in yourself and in other people, right? Like, you might be a supremacist and here we go. If it was not clear in that 1 through 5, here's what we've got. 1 through 5 again, we're going to go backwards again, right? So 5 is the most supremacist you could be. 1 is the least supremacist you could be. 5 is an overt supremacist. 1 is anti-supremacist. So if you're coming from a 5, okay, and you say, oh, what is a 5? Okay, you might be a level 5 supremacist if you believe, think, feel, and behave, right, in ways that suggest that someone else is worth less than you because they have a different way of living. You might be a level 5 supremacist if you have these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that say someone else is worth less. Okay, I'll leave you with that. You might be a level 4 supremacist if you make jokes at the expense of other people with identities that aren't yours. And let's be real, even if you are, we could talk about that too. Level 4 supremacists makes jokes at the expense of other people, right? It's casual, or they'll talk and have conversation around stereotypes as if it's totally factual, right? That's your level 4. You might be a level 3 supremacist, a covert supremacist. If you find yourself really stuck thinking about stereotypes, you believe that stereotypes are real, that an entire narrative, or one narrative, excuse me, can define an entire group of people, you might be a level 3 supremacist, right? Or have a level 3 supremacist part, just so we clarify that, right? You might have a level 2 supremacist part if you come against conflict with another identity and you get defensive or don't hold yourself or other people accountable. You might have a level 2 supremacist part. Sorry, y'all, my mouth is not having it. And finally, level 1, the anti-supremacist part. You might have an anti-supremacist part if you are very intentional about your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Embracing, right, owning your own truth without oppressing yourself, right? You are going to own your truth and the way you live your life, and also without oppressing other people. Okay, that's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are intentional about not oppressing yourself and not oppressing other people, which means you hold yourself and others accountable. You don't avoid it. You hold yourself and others accountable. Okay. All right. Y'all, I've thrown so much information in this episode at you. Wow. My brain is done. My brain is done, clearly. I cannot even speak of the words. Okay. So here we are at the end of this episode. I want to know what it is that you're taking away. But of course, as I now recap for you, these are real life things. They happen. Instead of casting somebody down as the worst or the best, right? Let's find the middle ground and build the bridge. Let's build the bridge to understanding. Okay. I want you to get curious about where are the supremacist parts that might exist within you, within other people. Get your journal out, get a friend to dialogue with what came up for you in today's episode, right? If you want to know about those 1 to 5 parts, check out the resources. I'm saying check out the resources now, and I'm actually wondering, do I even have that available yet? Because we are working on it and working on it back in the background to make sure that it is like super tight for y'all that you can actually use it. But when it is ready, it will be there, I promise. Otherwise, that is what we planned for today, folks. So thank you so much for listening in and playing with your triggers as a human being. If this has been helpful and you'd like to support Trigger Can We Play With That? Or here's a thought, support helping other people become less triggered because they have more knowledge as to what's happening, please share this episode. If you got something from this episode and you think, yeah, I think somebody else gonna benefit from this episode too, then by all means, please share the episode. That's all you gotta do. Share the episode. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. That's enough from me for now. Thanks for listening. And otherwise, stay curious.